Where should I begin? Perhaps at the very start, where every legend begins, with the unassuming birth of a boy destined to shake the foundations of the world, or at least that's what I like to tell myself. Imagine the scene a crisp January day in 89 BC, a young mother groaning in labour, oblivious to the fact that the child she was bringing into the world would be forever remembered as both hero and villain, depending on who you ask. That child was me, Marcus Antonius, born into a world of chaos and ambition, a world I would learn to navigate with charm, cunning, and more than a little audacity. But let's not rush to the grand battles and scandals just yet. Every tempest has its calm before the storm. My lineage, you see, was as respectable as it was complicated. My father, Marcus Antonius Creticus, held a decent enough name until he managed to disgrace it with a few military blunders. My mother, Julia Antonia, was of noble blood descendant of that illustrious Julian clan, which made me, albeit distantly, a cousin of Julius Caesar himself. Not a bad start for a boy from Rome, wouldn't you say? Growing up in the heart of the Republic, I quickly realised that Rome was no place for the faint-hearted. My education was thorough, not only in the usual rhetoric and philosophy, though I could hold my own in a debate, but also in the art of war. A tutor's lessons in Greek philosophy could only take a boy so far. For the rest, there was the sword. My early military training was more than just swinging a blade. It was learning the cold calculus of survival, a skill I would refine in the years to come. But no childhood tale is complete without its friends and future rivals. Enter Julius Caesar, the man who would become my mentor, my ally, and my doom. He was already a rising star when I was cutting my teeth on the basics of Roman politics. Our paths first crossed when I was a young officer, eager to prove myself. Caesar saw something in me, and I, in turn, found a man worth following, or so I thought at the time. But more on him later. Caesar deserves more than just a passing mention. And then there was Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, a man who would one day stand alongside me in the second triumvirate. Back then, he was just another ambitious soul, like so many others in Rome, eager to carve out a piece of the Republic for himself. Little did I know that he would become a reluctant partner in the great dance of power that we were all destined to perform. Lastly, how could I forget the young Octavian? Barely more than a boy when I first met him, he was a pale, sickly creature with a calculating mind that would one day outmaneuver us all. But who would have thought it then? Certainly not I, the dashing and experienced soldier, the man who would stand by Caesar's side until the bitter end. The gods must have laughed as they wrote our fates, knowing that this boy would be the one to finally bring me down. But I'm getting ahead of myself, aren't I? You see, that's the trouble with recounting one's life. It's hard not to let the ending seep into the beginning. But rest assured, dear viewer, by the time we're done, you'll know exactly how Marcus Antonius, the man, became Mark Antony, the legend. And perhaps, just perhaps, you'll understand why I did what I did, and whether, in the end, it was all worth it. But first, let us move forward to the next chapter in my life. The rise, the friendships, and the fateful decisions that would set the stage for the greatest drama Rome had ever seen. Stay with me. The tale has only just begun. As I grew into my early career, the Rome I knew was beginning to unravel, and in that turmoil, opportunities were ripe for the taking. My early days were spent in the shadow of Julius Caesar, a man whose ambition was only matched by his genius. It wasn't long before I became more than just a loyal officer. I became his confidant, his right hand, the man who would carry out the tasks too dangerous or too unsavoury for even Caesar himself. Yes, my friends, I was more than just a soldier. I was a man who knew how to get things done. Let's not forget that my ascent wasn't without its dalliances and scandals. After all, what's a Roman career without a little indiscretion? I was known to enjoy the finer things in life, wine, women, and the occasional wager. But I had charm, and in Rome, charm could be as powerful as any sword. Those who thought they could outmaneuver me with decorum quickly learned that while they played at politics, I was living it. But let's talk about the day that changed everything, the Ides of March, 44 BCE. Imagine it. The Senate, a place where the future of Rome was decided, turned into a slaughterhouse. Caesar, my mentor, my friend, fell beneath the daggers of men he had once called allies. And where was I? Left outside, held back by some twist of fate, unable to save him, unable to even witness the treachery. They left me there, powerless, while Rome's brightest star was snuffed out. And then came my moment, the oration at Caesar's funeral. If you've ever heard tales of that day, believe them. My speech was not just an oration, it was a reckoning. I knew exactly what I was doing as I lifted Caesar's bloodied toga and showed it to the masses. I knew what rage I was unleashing, what fires I was stoking. And I knew that the Senate, those men who thought they could rid themselves of Caesar, would soon learn that his spirit was not so easily banished. That speech set Rome ablaze. The people cried for justice, for vengeance, and I was only too happy to oblige. But I wasn't alone in my thirst for retribution. Octavian, that pale youth who once seemed so insignificant, now came forward, claiming his inheritance as Caesar's heir. And Lepidus, the man who had always hovered on the edges of power, saw his chance to join forces with us. Thus, the second triumvirate was born, Antony, Octavian and Lepidus, the new rulers of Rome. But don't be fooled, we were no triumvirs of equal standing. I was Caesar's avenger, the man with the legions, the man with the loyalty of the people. Lepidus was, well, a useful tool, and Octavian? He was a boy trying to fill a man's shoes. But Rome was in chaos, and we all knew that to restore order, there would be a reckoning. Caesar's assassins, Brutus, Cassius and the rest, would pay for their betrayal. Our first act as the second triumvirate was to draw up the proscription lists, those unlucky souls whose wealth and lives would fund our armies and our ambitions. It was a ruthless move, but necessary. We were not just restoring Rome, we were reshaping it in our image. And I, Marcus Antonius, was determined that my image would be the one Rome remembered. But as I stood on the precipice of ultimate power, I couldn't have known that my greatest challenge was yet to come. Not from the Senate, not from the remnants of the Republic, but from within our own ranks. Octavian, that calculating youth, was already plotting his path to supremacy. And Lepidus, ever the opportunist, would play his own hand when the time came. But we'll get to that soon enough. For now, bask in the glory of Rome's new rulers, the men who took the reins from a dying republic and steered it toward a new era. We had avenged Caesar, but in doing so, we set the stage for a conflict that would engulf the world. And as for me, well, I was just getting started. Stay with me. The tale grows darker and the stakes higher as we delve into the heart of power, betrayal, and the price of ambition. By the time our triumvirate had settled into power, the Rome I knew was no more. The Republic, with its lofty ideals and endless debates, was a fading memory. We, the second triumvirate, were not caretakers of the old ways. We were the architects of a new order, and at the centre of it all stood yours truly, Marcus Antonius, the man who had risen from the ashes of the Republic to shape its future. Or so I believed. The arrangement was clear, or as clear as anything could be in Roman politics. Octavian would rule the West, Lepidus the African provinces, and I would rule the East. A fair division of spoils, wouldn't you say? The East was a land of wealth and mystery, where the echoes of Alexander the Great still lingered, and I, like him, was a man who thrived in conquest and power. But let's not pretend it was all about governance and military campaigns. My time in the East is often remembered more for a certain queen than for any battles or treaties. Cleopatra. The name alone conjures images of beauty, seduction, and tragedy, doesn't it? And yes, I was utterly captivated by her. But who wouldn't be? Cleopatra was more than just a queen. She was a force of nature, a woman who could match wits with any man and seduce him with a glance. And seduce me she did. Our affair was the scandal of the century Rome's noble general entwined with the Queen of Egypt. But it was more than just a dalliance, it was a partnership. Cleopatra and I were not just lovers. We were rulers, our fates intertwined, our ambitions aligned. Together, we envisioned a new world order, one where Rome and Egypt would stand united, with our children to inherit the earth. It was a grand dream, and for a time, it seemed within reach. But the East, for all its splendour, was also a place of isolation. While I basked in the luxuries of Alexandria, my rivals in Rome were not idle. Octavian, that clever, calculating youth, was busy consolidating his power in the West. He portrayed me as a traitor to Rome, a man who had abandoned his duties for the sake of a foreign queen. And Lepidus? He was already being sidelined, reduced to a mere footnote in our story. Octavian and I were the real players now, and the game was one of life and death. The cracks in our triumvirate began to show as the years passed. Octavian, ever the manipulator, began to turn public opinion against me. He presented himself as the defender of Roman virtues, while I was painted as a decadent ruler, lost in the pleasures of the East. The Senate, always swayed by the winds of power, began to rally behind him, and soon it became clear. A confrontation was inevitable. I should have seen it coming. I should have known that Octavian, that snake, would use my own strengths against me. But I was too caught up in my own glory, too blinded by the allure of Cleopatra and the dream of an Eastern empire. And so, while I revelled in my victories, Octavian was quietly preparing for war. It was a war that would decide the fate of Rome, a war that would pit friend against friend, and in the end, only one of us would stand victorious. The stage was set for the final act of our drama. But little did I know that my machinations, my ambitions, would prove to be my undoing. I was no longer the rising star of Rome. I was a man on the brink, teetering between triumph and disaster. So stay with me, dear viewer, as we approach the climax of my tale. The battles ahead would not just be fought with swords and legions, but with the very soul of Rome at stake. And as for me, well, I was about to learn that even the greatest of men can fall when their reach exceeds their grasp. The end was near, and it would come swiftly, brutally, and with all the drama Rome could muster. The storm clouds had gathered, and the winds of fate blew ever stronger against me. I stood at the precipice, aware that my dreams were unravelling, but unwilling to face the full truth. My time in the East had made me bold, perhaps too bold, and as I prepared for the final showdown with Octavian, I could not shake the feeling that my destiny, so long tied to the fortunes of Rome, was slipping through my fingers. The year was 31 BC, and the setting was Actium. It was here that the tides would turn, and not in my favour. My forces were strong, my fleet vast, and by my side, as always, was Cleopatra. Together, we commanded a formidable army, one that should have crushed Octavian and his ragtag legions. But what we had in numbers, we lacked in unity. The cracks in our alliance were showing, and my soldiers, once loyal and fierce, now whispered of desertion and doubt. The battle itself was a disaster. My grand strategy, born out of confidence and a little too much wine, fell apart before my eyes. Octavian, that cunning fox, exploited every weakness, every misstep. As the clash of steel and the cries of the dying filled the air, I knew I had made a fatal error. My fleet was in disarray, my forces scattered, and in a moment of panic, I made a decision that would haunt me until my dying breath. I fled. Yes, you heard that right. Marcus Antonius, the great general, the avenger of Caesar, turned his back on the fight and retreated. Cleopatra followed, her fleet breaking away from the chaos as we made our escape back to Egypt. It was not just a tactical retreat, it was the end of everything I had fought for. As our ships sailed into the horizon, I knew that my machinations against Octavian had finally proved to be my undoing. In the months that followed, I tried to salvage what little remained of my power, but Rome had already decided my fate. Octavian, ever the propagandist, portrayed me as a coward, a man who had abandoned his men, his country, and his honour for the sake of a foreign queen. The Senate declared me an enemy of the state, and the legions that once marched under my banner now swore allegiance to Octavian. And so, in the summer of 30 BC, I found myself back in Alexandria, a city that had once felt like a second home, now a gilded prison. Cleopatra and I, once rulers of empires, were now cornered, trapped by our own hubris and by Octavian's relentless pursuit. The end was near, and we both knew it. Desperation breeds madness, and in those final days, I was no exception. My once clear mind, the mind that had outmaneuvered countless foes, now swam in despair and regret. I couldn't escape the feeling that I had failed Caesar, failed Rome, and most of all, failed myself. The whispers of betrayal, the rumours of Cleopatra negotiating with Octavian behind my back, only fueled my downward spiral. I felt the walls closing in, and in a final act of defiance, I chose to end it on my terms. With a sword in hand, I thrust it into my own body, hoping to join the ranks of Rome's tragic heroes, those who died with dignity, if not victory. But even in death, fate mocked me. My wound was not fatal, not immediately. As I lay there, bleeding and gasping for breath, word came that Cleopatra was still alive, still plotting, still defiant. My death, like so much of my life, was a failed gambit. Cleopatra, in her last act of defiance, took her own life with the bite of an asp, leaving me alone in our defeat. As I drifted toward the void, I wondered what history would say of me, of us. Would I be remembered as a noble warrior who fought for love and honour, or as a fool who let ambition and desire lead him to ruin? But that's the thing about history. It's written by the victors. And Octavian, the man who would soon be known as Augustus, was nothing if not a master of the narrative. He would ensure that my story, our story, was told in a way that suited his rise to power. And so, dear viewer, my tale comes to an end not with a bang, but with a whimper. My life, once so full of promise, ended in betrayal and despair. But do not weep for me, for in my fall, a new Rome would rise, one that would stand the test of time, even if it meant erasing the memory of those who had come before. But before you go, let us reflect on the legacy I left behind, the lessons, the warnings, the remnants of a life lived at the edge of glory and ruin. And stay with me, for in the next part, we will explore that legacy, the mark I left on Rome, and what it means for those who follow in my footsteps. And so, my life ended, not with the triumph I had once envisioned, but in defeat and despair. Yet even in death, a man's legacy can echo through the ages. As I slipped from this world, I could not help but wonder, what would become of the name Marcus Antonius? Would history remember me as the valiant warrior who stood by Caesar's side, or as the fool who squandered it all for love and ambition? To answer that, we must first consider the man who emerged from my ashes, Octavian, later Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. He was a master of crafting his image, a ruler who understood that history is shaped not by truth, but by those who hold the pen. And so, Octavian ensured that I was remembered not as his equal, not even as his rival, but as a tragic figure, a cautionary tale of what happens when a man allows his desires to overpower his reason. In the years that followed my death, the poets and historians of Rome painted me as a figure of both fascination and ridicule. They spoke of my victories, yes, but always with a hint of irony, as if to say, here was a man who could have been great had he not been so foolish. My affair with Cleopatra became the stuff of legend, immortalized in stories and plays. To the people of Rome, I was the man who fell, not because of Octavian's might, but because of a woman's wiles. But what of my true legacy? What did I leave behind, beyond the tales of love and war? I was, after all, a man of action. a soldier who fought in the name of the Republic, even as it crumbled around me. I stood beside Caesar, and in his name, I sought to bring justice to his assassins. I was a key figure in the last days of the Roman Republic, a witness to its transformation into an empire. And for all my faults, I was a man who understood the complexities of power, who knew that to rule was to navigate a web of alliances, betrayals, and ambitions. Yet, my legacy is not simply one of politics and warfare. It is also a personal one, tied to the choices I made, the people I loved, and the dreams I pursued. I was a man who loved deeply, who fought fiercely, and who, in the end, was undone by the very passions that drove me. My life was a testament to the dangers of ambition unchecked, of power pursued at all costs. In the centuries that followed, my story was told and retold, each time with a different emphasis, a different moral. I became a symbol of the fall of the Republic, a man who stood at the crossroads of history and chose the wrong path. But I also became a symbol of the human condition, a reminder that even the greatest among us are flawed, that even the most powerful are vulnerable to the same weaknesses as any other man. And what of Rome? What became of the city I fought so hard to protect, to rule? Rome endured, as it always did, but it was not the Rome I knew. The Republic was gone, replaced by an empire that bore little resemblance to the ideals of my youth. Augustus ruled with an iron fist, and the Senate, once the heart of Roman politics, became little more than a rubber stamp for his decisions. The dream of a free and just Rome died with Caesar, and I, in my way, was complicit in its downfall. Yet even in this there is a lesson, for Rome, like any great empire, was a reflection of its leaders, and in my rise and fall, one can see the echoes of the empire's own journey. Rome was built on ambition, on the relentless pursuit of power, and it was this same ambition that would eventually lead to its decline. My life, then, is not just a story of one man's failures, but a microcosm of the very forces that shaped Rome itself. So, what can you, dear viewer, take from my tale? Perhaps it is this, that power, unchecked, can be as destructive as it is alluring, that love, while a noble pursuit, can also lead to ruin if not tempered by wisdom, and that, in the end, our legacies are not defined by our triumphs, but by how we are remembered, by the stories we leave behind for those who follow. As you stand on the shores of the Tiber, or walk through the ruins of Alexandria, remember that these places were once the stage for the greatest drama of my life. And as you hold a coin with my likeness, remember that I was more than just a name in history. I was a man with all the flaws and virtues that entails. But our journey is not yet over. There is still more to explore, more to understand. In the final part of this tale, we will look to the future, to what remains of my legacy today, and how you, the modern traveller, the seeker of truth, can walk in my footsteps, not just in the ruins of Rome, but in the lessons that history has to offer. And so, we come to the end of our tale, or perhaps the beginning of another. My life, filled with triumphs, betrayals, love and war, may have ended centuries ago, but the echoes of my story continue to resonate today. The question now is not merely how I am remembered, but how my legacy can be experienced, understood, and even lived by those who walk the paths I once tread. Let us begin in Rome, the eternal city, where the heartbeat of the empire still thrums in the ruins of its once mighty structures. Stand beneath the arch of Septimius Severus in the Roman Forum, and imagine the scenes of victory that once paraded through these streets, the echoes of which I was a part. Feel the weight of history as you gaze upon the remnants of the Curia, where the Senate once debated the fate of the Republic, a fate that I, in my way, helped to seal. And while you're there, take a moment to visit the Ara Pacis, the altar of peace commissioned by Augustus himself. It's a beautiful monument, yes, but also a symbol of the peace that came after so much bloodshed, my blood among it. Consider how the Rome of Augustus, built on the ruins of the Republic, was shaped not only by his vision, but by the conflicts and choices of men like me. Travel next to Egypt to Alexandria, where Cleopatra and I sought refuge as the walls of our empire crumbled around us. The city today bears little resemblance to the bustling metropolis of our time, but the spirit of Alexandria, with its mix of cultures and its thirst for knowledge, endures. Stand by the Mediterranean, where our ships once sailed, and reflect on how ambition can drive men to great heights, and how quickly those heights can become cliffs. And should you wish to hold a piece of my story in your hands, consider the ancient coins that still bear my likeness. These small relics, traded in markets across the empire, tell a story of power, propaganda, and the fleeting nature of human endeavours. Collect them, study them, and perhaps, in doing so, you will feel a connection to the past that is as tangible as the coins themselves. But more than these physical journeys, there is a deeper way to connect with my legacy through the understanding of history itself. My life, after all, was a reflection of the broader currents of my time, the struggle between republic and empire, the tension between personal ambition and public duty, the conflict between love and power. These are not just the stories of the past, but the questions that continue to shape our world today. And here lies the true lesson of my story. To live the Renaissance spirit is to engage with history not as a distant memory, but as a living dialogue with the present and the future. It is to recognise that the stories of men like me, filled with all our flaws and virtues, offer insights into the nature of power, the complexity of human relationships, and the enduring struggle for justice and equity. As you explore these topics, whether through the ruins of Rome, the sands of Alexandria, or the pages of history, remember that the pursuit of knowledge is a pursuit of truth. It is a journey that enhances our stewardship of the earth and our relationships with one another. By embracing the lessons of the past, we can better understand our present and shape a more just and humane future. So, what can you, dear viewer, take from my tale? Perhaps it is this, that power, unchecked, can be as destructive as it is alluring. That love, while a noble pursuit, can also lead to ruin if not tempered by wisdom. And that, in the end, our legacies are not defined by our triumphs, but by how we are remembered, by the stories we leave behind for those who follow. As you stand on the shores of the Tiber, or walk through the ruins of Alexandria, remember that these places were once the stage for the greatest drama of my life. And as you hold a coin with my likeness, remember that I was more than just a name in history. I was a man with all the flaws and virtues that entails. But our journey is not yet over. There is still more to explore, more to understand. In the final part of this tale, we will look to the future, to what remains of my legacy today, and how you, the modern traveller, the seeker of truth, can walk in my footsteps, not just in the ruins of Rome, but in the lessons that history has to offer. So, as you continue your exploration of history, culture, and the human condition, I leave you with this. Live the Renaissance spirit. Engage with the world with an open mind and a thirst for knowledge. Let history be your guide, and let the lessons of those who came before men like me inform your path. For in doing so, you will not only honour the past, but also contribute to a legacy that will endure for generations to come. And if you find yourself in need of more inspiration, remember that there is a wealth of knowledge waiting for you on the Renaissance Spirit channel. Delve into the stories, the discussions, and the insights that can help you live a life of learning, growing, and thinking. Please subscribe, turn on notifications, and share your thoughts in the comments. Let's continue this journey together, exploring what life has to offer, and shaping a future that is as rich in wisdom as it is in compassion. But before you go, take the quiz next to see if you truly embody the Renaissance spirit. For history has not died, only our understanding of it has. And with that understanding, we can walk forward together, enlightened by the past and guided by the lessons it offers. Vive Renaissance Spiritus! Historia non et mortua, sed intellectus noster.